The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of a modest two-story house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Rachel Donovan stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, watching her 8-year-old son Tommy chase their golden retriever across the backyard. The grass was still wet from the overnight rain, and she could see his sneakers getting soaked. She would have called out to him, told him to come inside, but something about the pure joy on his face made her hesitate. Moments like these had become rare since his father left 3 years ago. Rachel was 34 years old, with auburn hair that she kept tied back in a practical ponytail and eyes the color of autumn leaves. Her hands were rough from years of hard work, first at the textile factory on the edge of town, and now at the diner where she worked double shifts most weekends. She had learned to be strong in ways she never imagined possible, carrying the weight of single motherhood without complaint, even when the loneliness crept in during the quiet hours of the night. The sound of a motorcycle engine broke the morning stillness. It was a deep, powerful rumble that seemed to shake the windows and travel through the floorboards. Rachel dried her hands on a dish towel and walked to the front window, pushing aside the curtain just enough to see the street. A man on a black motorcycle had stopped at the end of her driveway. He wore a leather vest over a dark flannel shirt, and even from this distance she could see the patches sewn onto the back of his vest. The image of a wolf's head surrounded by flames. Below it, the words, "Iron Wolves, MC." Rachel felt her heart rate quicken. Cedar Falls was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors remained unlocked and children played in the streets until sunset. Motorcycle clubs sometimes passed through on their way to somewhere else, but they never stopped. They certainly never stopped at her house. The man removed his helmet and hung it on the handlebar. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair pulled back into a short ponytail and a face weathered by sun and wind. There was something deliberate about the way he moved, slow and purposeful, as if each motion had been considered beforehand. He looked at the house for a long moment, and Rachel could have sworn he was reading the faded numbers beside the door, confirming he had the right address. Then he began walking up the driveway. Rachel stepped back from the window, her mind racing through possibilities. She thought about calling the police, but something stopped her. There was nothing threatening about the man's posture. His hands hung loose at his sides, and his expression, what she could see of it, seemed almost uncertain. Nervous, even. The doorbell rang. Tommy had seen the motorcycle, too. He came running around the side of the house, the dog at his heels, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, did you see that bike? It's so cool." Rachel held up a hand, signaling him to stay back. She opened the door just enough to see the man standing on her porch. He was taller than she had expected, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had spent decades gripping handlebars. His eyes were a pale blue, almost gray, and they studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. But there was no hostility in his gaze. If anything, there was something that looked almost like recognition. "Rachel Donovan?" His voice was deep, roughened by years. "Who's asking?" The man reached into the inside pocket of his vest, and Rachel tensed. But all he pulled out was a photograph, creased and faded, its edges worn soft from being handled too many times. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I knew your father." The words hit Rachel like a physical force. Her father, Staff Sergeant William Carter, had been dead for 15 years. He had served 3 tours overseas before coming home, only to be taken by an illness that had claimed him slowly, painfully, over the course of 2 years. Rachel had been 19 when he died, barely an adult, still trying to understand who she was and who she wanted to become. "My father passed away a long time ago," she said carefully. "How did you know him?" Daniel held out the photograph. Rachel took it with trembling fingers and looked at the image. It showed 2 young men in military uniforms, their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the reckless confidence of youth. One of them was unmistakably her father, his face fuller and unlined, his dark hair cropped short. The other was Daniel Mercer, younger and leaner, but with the same pale eyes that now watched her from the porch. "We served together," Daniel said. "Fallujah, 2004. Your father saved my life." He hesitated, as if the next words cost him something. I made him a promise, and I'm here to keep it. Rachel stared at the photograph, then at the man who had carried it for 2 decades. She had 1,000 questions, but before she could ask any of them, Tommy pushed past her legs and looked up at the stranger with undisguised curiosity. Are you a real biker? Can I see your motorcycle? Daniel looked down at the boy, and something shifted in his weathered face, a softening around the eyes, a ghost of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Maybe later, kid. Right now, I need to talk to your mom. That okay with you? Tommy looked at Rachel for permission, and she found herself nodding slowly, stepping aside to let Daniel Mercer into her home. She did not know it yet, but this moment would change everything. The past she thought she had buried was about to rise again, bringing with it secrets, sorrows, and a redemption that had been 20 years in the making. Chapter 1. The living room of Rachel Donovan's house was small but clean, filled with secondhand furniture that she had refinished herself and photographs that documented Tommy's growth from infancy to now. Daniel Mercer sat on the edge of the worn sofa, his large frame making the space feel even smaller, while Rachel sat across from him in the rocking chair that had belonged to her grandmother. Tommy had been sent to his room with the promise of seeing the motorcycle later, and Rachel could hear him upstairs, probably pressing his face against the window for a better look at the black machine parked in the driveway. The golden retriever, whose name was Scout, had stationed himself at Daniel's feet and was sniffing the stranger's boots with intense concentration. You said you made my father a promise, Rachel said. What kind of promise? Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning the photograph over in his hands. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. It was February 2004. We were on patrol in a sector of the city that had been quiet for weeks. Too quiet, as it turned out. We got ambushed, took fire from 3 directions at once. I got hit in the leg, went down hard, couldn't move, couldn't fight. The rest of the squad was pinned, taking cover wherever they could find it. He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. Your father was the only one who moved. While everyone else was hunkering down, trying to stay alive, Bill Carter ran straight into the open. He grabbed me by the vest, dragged me 30 yards to a concrete barrier while rounds were kicking up dust all around us. He got hit twice doing it, once in the shoulder, once in the arm. Kept going anyway. Got me to cover, applied a tourniquet to my leg, then went back out to help the others. Rachel listened in silence. Her father had rarely spoken about his time overseas. He had carried those experiences locked away inside him, sharing only fragments with her mother, and even less with her. She had grown up knowing he was a hero, but the word had always felt abstract, a label without substance. They gave him a bronze star for what he did that day, Daniel continued. But he never talked about it, never wanted recognition. When I tried to thank him later in the hospital, he just said, "That's what we do. We take care of our own." That sounds like him, Rachel said softly. Daniel nodded. Before I shipped home, we had a conversation. Just the 2 of us, late at night. He told me about his daughter, about how proud he was of you, about how worried he was that something might happen to him and you'd be left without protection. He asked me to promise that if he ever wasn't around, and if you ever needed help, I would be there. Rachel felt her throat tighten. And you said yes. I said yes. But then I came home, and everything fell apart. Daniel set the photograph on the coffee table between them. His eyes grew distant, fixed on something she could not see. I struggled. A lot of us did. Couldn't hold down a job, couldn't maintain relationships, couldn't sleep without seeing things I wanted to forget. I drank too much, made bad decisions, pushed away everyone who tried to help. Lost touch with your father, lost touch with myself. He drew a breath, steadying himself. By the time I got my life together, Bill was gone. I found out too late. Tried to track you down, but you had moved, gotten married, changed your name. I spent years looking, hitting dead ends, following leads that went nowhere. Started to think maybe I'd never find you, that I'd failed him completely. But you found me now, Rachel said. How? A faint smile crossed Daniel's face. Your father's old unit has a reunion every year. I went to the last one, hoping someone might have information. Turned out one of the guys, Pete Hargrove, had stayed in touch with your mother before she passed. He had an old Christmas card with your return address on it. I got on my bike the next morning. Rachel sat back in the rocking chair, trying to process everything she had heard. This man, this stranger with his leather vest and his weathered face, had spent years searching for her because of a promise made in a war zone 2 decades ago. It seemed impossible, like something from a story rather than real life. I don't understand, she said finally. Even if you found me, why now? What kind of help do you think I need? Daniel's expression grew serious. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I didn't just come because of the promise. I came because of what Pete told me at the reunion. Rachel frowned. Pete Hargrove was a name she recognized. He had attended her father's funeral, a quiet man with kind eyes who had stood in the back and left before the reception. What did Pete tell you? He said your mother mentioned you in her last letter, a few months before she passed. She was worried about you. Said you were having a hard time, that your husband had left, that you were struggling to keep things together. She was afraid for you, Rachel. Afraid you were carrying too much alone. Rachel felt the heat rise in her cheeks, partly from embarrassment, partly from a grief she thought she had buried. My mother shouldn't have said anything. I'm fine. We're fine. Tommy and I, we manage. Daniel held her gaze without flinching. I spent a long time telling people I was fine. Learned the hard way that fine is just a word we use when we don't want help. The silence stretched between them. Scout had settled down at Daniel's feet and was now dozing, apparently having decided that the stranger was not a threat. Finally, Rachel spoke. What exactly do you think you can do? Daniel reached into his vest again and produced a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. The Iron Wolves aren't just a motorcycle club. We do things for people. Community things. We've helped veterans, families in need, kids in bad situations. We don't talk about it much. That's not why we do it. Rachel unfolded the paper. It was a list of names and phone numbers, accompanied by brief descriptions. Roof repairs completed for elderly widow, groceries delivered to disabled veteran, tutoring provided for at-risk youth. We heard about what happened to your fence, Daniel said, and the leak in your roof, and the car that's been sitting in your driveway for 2 months because you can't afford the repairs. Rachel's mouth fell open. How do you know about that? Small towns talk. And when I got here yesterday, I spent some time at the diner, talked to a few people. They care about you, Rachel. They want to help but don't know how to offer. Rachel felt her defenses rising, the walls she had built to protect herself and her son. I didn't ask for help. I don't want charity. Daniel's voice remained calm. It's not charity. It's your father's brothers keeping a promise. There's a difference. Before Rachel could respond, the sound of footsteps came thundering down the stairs. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Mom, can I please go see the motorcycle now? Please. Rachel looked at her son, then at Daniel Mercer, then at the list of good deeds still clutched in her hand. She felt something shifting inside her, a resistance giving way to something else, something that might have been hope. Okay, she said quietly. Let's all go see the motorcycle. As they walked outside together, the morning sun warm on their faces, Rachel did not know what the future held. She did not know if she could trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, carrying the ghost of her father's promise. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was not entirely alone. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you've ever believed that kindness can transcend time, that a promise made in hardship can echo across decades, then you belong here. Subscribe now and join a community that believes in the enduring power of honor and redemption. Chapter 2. The Iron Wolves chapter house sat at the end of a gravel road 12 miles outside Cedar Falls, surrounded by tall pines and overlooked by a sky that seemed impossibly wide. It was a converted farmhouse, weathered but solid, with a long wooden porch that wrapped around 2 sides and a garage large enough to hold a dozen motorcycles. Daniel had invited Rachel to visit, to meet the men and women who made up the club. She had resisted at first, uncomfortable with the idea of entering a world she did not understand. But curiosity had won out, along with Tommy's relentless enthusiasm. 2 days after Daniel's appearance at her door, she found herself riding in the passenger seat of his truck, her son bouncing excitedly in the back. "Why a truck?" Tommy had asked when they picked him up. "I thought you only rode motorcycles." Daniel had smiled. "Sometimes you need more than 2 wheels, kid, especially when you're bringing guests." Now, as they pulled up to the chapter house, Rachel could see several motorcycles already parked in a neat row beside the garage. A few men were visible on the porch, coffee cups in hand, watching the truck approach with expressions of calm interest. "Don't worry," Daniel said, sensing her tension. "They don't bite. Mostly." Rachel forced a smile. "That's reassuring." They parked, and Daniel led them up the wooden steps to the porch. The men there ranged in age from their 30s to their 60s, each wearing the same leather vest with the wolf's head patch. They nodded at Daniel and turned their attention to Rachel and Tommy with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Brothers," Daniel said, "this is Rachel Donovan, Bill Carter's daughter." The effect of her father's name was immediate. The men straightened, their expressions shifting from casual friendliness to something deeper. One of them, a heavily built man with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Marcus Cole. Your father was a legend, ma'am. It's an honor." Rachel shook his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm. "Thank you. I didn't realize he was known here." "Daniel served with 3 of our members," Marcus explained. "We all heard the stories, every single one of them." Another man approached, younger than the others, with sharp features and a sleeve of tattoos covering his left arm. He crouched down to Tommy's level and held out a fist for a bump. "Hey, little man. I'm Reese. You like motorcycles?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "They're the coolest thing ever." Reese grinned. "Want to sit on one?" Tommy looked at Rachel with desperate hope. "Mom?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but be careful." She watched as Reese led her son toward the row of motorcycles, explaining each one with patient enthusiasm. Tommy's laughter carried across the morning air, light and pure, and Rachel felt something loosen in her chest. She could not remember the last time he had laughed like that. "Come inside," Daniel said. "There's someone you should meet." The interior of the chapter house was not what Rachel had expected. The walls were lined with photographs, some of them decades old, showing members at various events. Charity rides, community fundraisers, group shots at veterans' hospitals. There was a pool table in one corner, a worn leather couch along one wall, and a kitchen area where a woman with silver-streaked hair was pouring coffee into ceramic mugs. "This is Grace," Daniel said. "She runs the house. Pretty much runs all of us, if we're being honest." Grace turned and smiled. She was in her early 60s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. "So you're Bill's daughter." Grace wiped her hands on a dish towel and came forward to clasp Rachel's hands in her own. "Daniel's been talking about nothing else for months. We started to think you were a ghost." Rachel managed a small laugh. "I'm starting to feel like one." Grace's smile softened. "Sit down, honey. Have some coffee. We've got a lot to talk about." They sat at a long wooden table, and Grace poured coffee while Daniel went to check on Tommy. Rachel wrapped her hands around the warm mug and studied the photographs on the wall nearest to her. One showed a group of bikers outside a children's hospital, surrounded by kids in wheelchairs. Another captured a line of motorcycles escorting a funeral procession, American flags fluttering from their handlebars. "We started the Iron Wolves 20 years ago," Grace said, following Rachel's gaze. "A bunch of veterans who couldn't adjust to civilian life. We were angry, lost, breaking apart. Then we realized we could use that energy for something better. Started helping people. Turned out that was what we needed all along." Rachel nodded slowly. "Daniel mentioned that you do community work." Grace chuckled. "That's a polite way of putting it. We fix things. Houses, cars, sometimes lives. Whatever people need that they can't do themselves. The big organizations, the charities, they mean well, but they move slow. Too much paperwork, too many rules. We just show up and get it done. Why? Rachel asked. What do you get out of it? Grace's expression grew thoughtful. Redemption, I suppose. Most of us have done things we're not proud of. Hurt people we loved. Made choices we regret. Helping others, it doesn't erase any of that. But it gives us a chance to put something good back into the world. Balance the scales a little. Rachel thought about her own life, the choices she had made and the ones that had been made for her. The husband who had walked away without looking back. The years of struggling to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. The loneliness that settled in at night after Tommy was asleep and the house grew quiet. I don't know if I can accept your help, she said finally. It feels wrong, taking things I haven't earned. Grace reached across the table and covered Rachel's hand with her own. Let me tell you something about your father. When Daniel was lying in that hospital, convinced he was going to lose his leg, Bill sat with him every single day. Read to him, talked to him, kept him sane when everything felt impossible. And when Daniel thanked him, Bill said something I've never forgotten. What? He said, kindness isn't something you earn. It's something you pass on. Somebody helped me once, and I'm helping you. One day, you'll help someone else. That's how it works. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, but not before Grace noticed. Your father believed in the chain of kindness. He believed that every good deed creates ripples, spreading out in ways we can never predict. By letting us help you, you're not taking charity. You're continuing his legacy. You're keeping the chain unbroken. The screen door banged open and Tommy came running in, his face flushed with excitement. Mom! Mom! Reese let me sit on his motorcycle, and he showed me how the throttle works. And Marcus said, maybe when I'm older I can learn to ride. Rachel laughed despite herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. That sounds amazing, sweetheart. Daniel appeared in the doorway, a faint smile on his weathered face. He's a natural. Got his grandfather's spirit. Rachel looked at the photograph on the wall again, the one with the bikers at the children's hospital. Then she looked at her son, glowing with happiness, and at Daniel, who had traveled so far to keep a promise, and at Grace, whose eyes held nothing but warmth and understanding. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, tell me what you have in mind. Chapter 3. The work began the following Saturday. Rachel woke at dawn to the sound of trucks pulling into her driveway, one after another, their engines rumbling in the early morning stillness. By the time she got dressed and went outside, there were a dozen Iron Wolves members unloading tools, lumber, and supplies from a trailer hitched to a massive pickup truck. Daniel was directing traffic, pointing each person to their assigned area with the efficiency of someone who had coordinated far more complicated operations. When he saw Rachel standing on the porch, he walked over with a coffee thermos in each hand. Thought you might need this. Rachel took the thermos gratefully. I didn't expect so many people. Word travels fast. When the brothers heard Bill Carter's daughter needed help, they came from 3 different chapters. Some of these guys drove all night. Rachel watched as the crew dispersed across her property. 2 men were already inspecting the damaged fence along the east side of the yard. Another group was setting up ladders against the house, preparing to address the leak in the roof. A woman with mechanical expertise had popped the hood of Rachel's broken-down car and was examining the engine with focused intensity. This is too much, Rachel said. I can't pay for any of this. Daniel shook his head. Nobody's asking you to. The materials were donated. The labor is volunteer. All you need to do is let us work. But why? Why would strangers do this for me? Daniel took a long drink from his thermos before answering. Your father saved my life. That's not a debt you repay once. It's a debt you carry forever, and you pay it forward however you can. These people, the ones working on your house right now, they understand that. They've all been saved by someone. They're all looking for ways to pass it on. Tommy emerged from the house in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw the crowd in the yard, his jaw dropped. Mom, what's happening? We're getting some help, sweetheart. Tommy's gaze found Daniel. Did your friends come? They sure did. And if you get dressed fast enough, maybe you can help carry some tools. Tommy disappeared back into the house with a speed that made Rachel laugh. She turned back to Daniel, searching for words that felt inadequate. I don't know how to thank you. Daniel's expression was gentle. You don't have to. Just watch. See what happens when people come together. The day unfolded like a choreographed dance. The fence crew replaced rotted posts and strung new wire with practiced precision. The roofing team patched the leak and replaced several damaged shingles that Rachel had not even known were compromised. The mechanic, whose name was Sandra, diagnosed the car's problem as a failed alternator and installed a replacement she had brought with her. Throughout it all, Rachel found herself drawn into the work. She painted trim alongside Grace. She handed tools to Marcus as he reinforced a sagging section of the porch. She listened to stories about her father that she had never heard before, glimpses of a man who had touched more lives than she had ever imagined. By late afternoon, the property had been transformed. The fence stood straight and strong. The roof no longer leaked. The car hummed to life when Tommy turned the key, drawing cheers from the assembled crowd. But it was the smaller moments that affected Rachel most. The way Marcus took time to teach Tommy how to hammer a nail properly. The way Sandra explained each step of the car repair, treating Rachel as an equal rather than a client. The way everyone paused at noon to share sandwiches and laughter, their easy camaraderie including Rachel as though she had always belonged. As the sun began to set and the volunteers started packing up their tools, Rachel stood in her newly repaired yard and felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Community. Belonging. The sense that she was not alone in the world, that there were people who would show up when it mattered, not because of obligation or payment, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Daniel approached her, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Not a bad day's work. Rachel shook her head in wonder. I still can't believe this is real. It's real, and it's just the beginning. What do you mean? Daniel glanced toward the porch, where Tommy was showing Grace a drawing he had made of a motorcycle. The evening light caught his profile, softening the lines of his weathered face. There's something else I need to tell you. Something about your father that I've been holding back. Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. What is it? Daniel's jaw tightened. Let's take a walk. They walked in silence past the edge of the yard, following a path that led to a small creek bordered by wildflowers. The water caught the last of the daylight, glittering like scattered diamonds. When they reached the bank, Daniel stopped and turned to face her. Your father kept a journal during his service. He gave it to me before his last deployment, asked me to hold on to it, said if anything ever happened to him, he wanted me to give it to you when you were ready. Rachel's heart was pounding. You have his journal? Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his vest and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its cover worn smooth by time. He held it out to her. I've carried this for 20 years, read it once right after he gave it to me, and never opened it again. It's not my story to know, it's yours. Rachel took the journal with trembling hands. The leather was soft beneath her fingers, warmed by years of being carried close to Daniel's heart. Why didn't you give me this when we first met? Because I wanted you to see who we are first. What we stand for. Your father's journal, it contains things that are hard to read. Things about what he experienced overseas. Things about his fears for you and your future. I didn't want to burden you with that before you had support. Rachel clutched the journal to her chest, feeling the weight of her father's words, unread but already precious. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping it safe, for finding me, for everything. Daniel nodded, his pale eyes bright with emotion. Your father was the best man I ever knew. Honoring his memory, that's not a burden. It's a privilege. They stood together by the creek as the stars began to emerge, two people connected by a promise that had traveled across decades and distance to bring them to this moment. If you have ever felt moved by a story of loyalty that transcends time, pause right now and leave a comment saying, "A promise kept is a love that never dies." Let us know that you believe in the unbreakable bonds of honor. We want to hear from you, because your words become part of this story too. Chapter 4. Rachel did not open the journal that night. She held it for hours, sitting alone in the living room after Tommy had gone to bed, tracing the edges of the cover with her fingertips, but she could not bring herself to open it. The weight of what it contained felt immense, and she was not sure she was ready to bear it. Instead, she found herself thinking about her father in ways she had not allowed herself to think in years. The memories came flooding back, released from wherever she had locked them away. She remembered Sunday mornings when he would make pancakes shaped like animals, presenting each one with exaggerated ceremony. She remembered the way he would sit on the edge of her bed at night, telling stories about a brave knight who always protected the innocent. She remembered the last time she saw him smile, 2 days before he died, when she had brought Tommy to visit him in the hospital and placed the newborn in his arms. He had looked at his grandson with such love, such fierce protectiveness, that Rachel had felt her heart break and heal at the same time. "Take care of him," he had whispered, "and let people take care of you. You're stronger than you know, but you don't have to be strong alone." She had not understood what he meant then. She had spent the years since his death trying to prove that she could handle everything herself, that she did not need anyone, that relying on others was weakness. But sitting here now, surrounded by the evidence of a community that had come together to help her, she wondered if she had misunderstood his message entirely. Maybe strength was not about standing alone. Maybe it was about knowing when to accept the hands that reached out to you. The next morning, Rachel finally opened the journal. She started from the beginning, reading her father's neat handwriting as he described his training, his deployment, his first impressions of a country so different from the Iowa farmland where he had grown up. The early entries were practical, almost clinical, focused on logistics and routines. But as she read on, the entries changed. They became more personal, more raw. He wrote about the fear that gripped him before every patrol, the guilt that consumed him when he lost men under his command, the constant struggle to maintain hope in circumstances that seemed hopeless. One entry, dated 3 weeks before he was wounded, made Rachel stop breathing. "I think about Rachel every day. She doesn't know what I do here, what I've seen, what I've had to become. I hope she never knows. I want to protect her from all of it, to keep her safe in a world where safety is just an illusion. But if something happens to me, I want her to know that everything I did, every choice I made, was to try to build a better world for her. She is my reason. She is my purpose. She is the light I carry in the darkest places." Rachel closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She had never known. All those years of anger at his absences, of resentment at his emotional distance after he returned, of grief at his death, she had never understood what he was carrying, what he was shielding her from. The sound of the doorbell made her jump. She wiped her eyes quickly and went to answer it. Daniel stood on the porch, and he was not alone. Behind him were Marcus, Reese, Grace, and several other members of the Iron Wolves. They were all dressed in their vests, their expressions solemn but warm. "We heard you might need company today," Grace said gently. "Mind if we come in?" Rachel looked at the group of people who had become, in such a short time, something like family. She thought about her father's words in the journal, about letting people take care of her, about not having to be strong alone. "Please," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." They filed into the living room, filling the space with their presence. Someone started making coffee. Someone else began preparing breakfast. Tommy came downstairs to find the house full of people and immediately gravitated toward Reese, who was showing him card tricks at the kitchen table. Rachel sat with Daniel and Grace in the living room, the journal still clutched in her hands. "I read some of it," she said quietly. "My father's journal." Daniel nodded. "I figured you might. That's why we came. He wrote about me, about wanting to protect me, about being afraid of what might happen to me if he was gone." Grace reached over and took Rachel's hand. "He loved you fiercely. That kind of love. It doesn't just disappear when someone passes. It echoes. It finds ways to reach across time. Is that what you believe?" That love can transcend death? Grace smiled. I believe that the people who love us leave pieces of themselves behind, in the choices they made, the lives they touched, the promises they asked others to keep. Daniel showing up at your door, that's not coincidence. That's your father's love, finding a way to reach you even now. Rachel looked at Daniel, who sat quietly, his pale eyes fixed on the floor. You've given up so much to find me. Years of searching, all this effort. Daniel shook his head. I told you before, it's not a burden, it's a privilege. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. Your father gave me a second chance at life. Everything I've done since then, every good choice I've made, every person I've helped, it all traces back to him. Finding you, keeping his promise, it's not payment, it's continuation. Tommy's laughter rang out from the kitchen, pure and joyful. Rachel listened to the sound and felt something shift inside her, the last of her resistance crumbling away. I've been so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of accepting help, afraid of letting people in, afraid of being vulnerable. I thought if I just kept working hard enough, kept pushing through, I could handle everything on my own. Grace squeezed her hand. And now? Rachel looked around the room at the people who had entered her life so unexpectedly. At Daniel, who had searched for her for 20 years. At Grace, who offered wisdom and warmth in equal measure. At the others who had given their time and labor to fix her home because of a connection to a man they had never met. Now I think my father was right. I don't have to be strong alone. None of us do. Daniel reached into his vest and pulled out a small wooden box worn with age. He opened it to reveal a medal resting on faded velvet. A bronze star. This belonged to your father. He gave it to me before he died. Said he didn't deserve it, that he was just doing his job. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right time to return it. He held the box out to Rachel. She took it with steady hands and looked at the medal that represented her father's courage, his sacrifice, his love. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping it, for keeping all of it. He asked me to give you a message too. Said if I ever found you, if you ever needed to hear it, I should tell you. What message? Daniel's voice was gentle. He said, tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her she's everything I hoped she would become and more. Tell her that every hardship she faces is making her stronger and that strength will carry her through anything. Rachel pressed the medal to her heart, feeling the cool metal warm against her skin. The tears came freely now, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of healing, of a daughter finally receiving her father's blessing across the void of years. Tommy appeared in the doorway, watching his mother with wide, concerned eyes. Mom, are you okay? Rachel opened her arms, and Tommy ran into them. She held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the solid reality of his small body against hers. I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm more than okay. Chapter 5. The weeks that followed brought changes Rachel could never have anticipated. The Iron Wolves became a regular presence in her life, not as saviors swooping in to rescue her, but as friends who showed up consistently, reliably, without expectation or judgment. Daniel came by every Sunday for dinner. He and Tommy had developed a bond that surprised Rachel with its depth. Daniel taught the boy how to change a tire, how to check oil levels, how to use tools safely and effectively. He shared stories of adventure and travel that made Tommy's eyes shine with wonder. But more than the practical skills, he gave Tommy something Rachel had not been able to provide alone. A steady male presence, a grandfather figure, a living connection to the hero Tommy had never known. Grace became Rachel's confidant, the older woman she could turn to for advice and perspective. They met for coffee twice a week at the diner where Rachel worked, and Grace listened without judgment as Rachel unpacked years of suppressed emotion. The grief over her father's death, the anger at her ex-husband's abandonment, the fear that she was not enough for her son. You're more than enough, Grace told her one afternoon. Being a good parent isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up even when you're tired. It's about loving your child enough to keep trying, You've been doing that all along. The other Iron Wolves contributed in ways large and small. Marcus helped Rachel negotiate with the bank when she fell behind on her mortgage, his intimidating presence somehow opening doors that had been firmly closed. Reese tutored Tommy in math, revealing a patience and gentleness that belied his rough exterior. Sandra taught Rachel basic car maintenance so she would never be stranded again. But the most significant change was internal. Rachel began to see herself differently. Not as a victim of circumstance, not as a woman abandoned and struggling, but as someone worthy of love and support, someone who had value beyond her usefulness to others. She started to dream again, small dreams at first, taking a class at the community college, learning to paint, something she had loved as a child but abandoned in the practicalities of adult life, traveling to see the ocean, which she had never visited despite living only a day's drive away, and larger dreams too. Opening her own small business, providing a better life for Tommy. Finding love again, not because she needed someone to complete her, but because she had learned that connection was not weakness. One evening in late October, as the leaves turned gold and crimson and the air carried the first hints of winter, Daniel asked Rachel to take a ride with him. Not on his motorcycle, but in his truck, to a place he wanted to show her. They drove for an hour through the Iowa countryside, past farms and fields and small towns that seemed frozen in time. Tommy stayed with Grace for the evening, already comfortable enough with the older woman to treat it like a sleepover with a favorite grandmother. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked as they turned onto a narrow country road. "You'll see." They crested a hill, and Daniel pulled the truck to the side of the road. Below them, nestled in a valley, was a small cemetery bordered by ancient oak trees. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the headstones cast long shadows across the manicured grass. "Your father is buried here," Daniel said quietly. "I visited once a few years ago when I was still searching for you. I wanted to tell him I hadn't given up." Rachel felt her breath catch. She had not visited her father's grave since the funeral. The pain had been too raw, the memories too sharp. Over the years, the avoidance had become habit, and habit had become distance. "I should have come," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "There's no should have. There's only now." They walked down the hill together, following a gravel path that wound between the graves. Daniel seemed to know the way by heart, and Rachel followed him until they reached a simple granite headstone beneath one of the oak trees. Staff Sergeant William James Carter, beloved husband, father, and soldier. His light lives on. Rachel knelt before the grave, her fingers tracing the carved letters. The stone was cold beneath her touch, but the words were warm, alive with meaning. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "It's been a long time." She did not know how long she stayed there, speaking to the stone and the memory and the presence she could almost feel watching over her. She told him about Tommy, about how much the boy reminded her of him. She told him about the hard years, the struggles, the moments when she had nearly given up. And she told him about Daniel, about the Iron Wolves, about the promise that had been kept across 2 decades of searching. "I understand now," she said finally, "what you meant about letting people take care of me. I was so afraid of being vulnerable, of needing anyone. But you knew, didn't you? You knew that the strongest thing we can do is accept love when it's offered." The wind stirred the leaves of the oak tree, and for a moment, Rachel could have sworn she heard her father's voice in the rustling. Not words exactly, but a feeling. Warmth, approval, peace. She rose to her feet and turned to find Daniel standing a respectful distance away, his head bowed. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me here." He looked up, his pale eyes bright with emotion. "He would have wanted you to come when you were ready." Rachel walked to him and without hesitation wrapped her arms around him in a hug. He stiffened for a moment, surprised, then relaxed and returned the embrace. "You kept your promise," she said against his shoulder. "My father chose well." Chapter 6. The following spring brought renewal in every sense. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and the world seemed awake from a long sleep. Rachel had enrolled in the community college, taking evening classes in business administration while continuing to work at the diner. It was exhausting, juggling work and school and motherhood, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was building towards something rather than just surviving. Tommy had flourished under the attention of the Iron Wolves. His grades had improved, his confidence had grown, and he had developed a sense of belonging that extended beyond the walls of their small house. He talked constantly about motorcycles, about the stories Daniel told him, about the adventures he would have when he was older. One Saturday in May, Daniel arrived at the house with an unusual request. "We're having a gathering at the chapter house next weekend. Annual spring ride. Families are invited. I was hoping you and Tommy might come." Rachel hesitated. She had visited the chapter house several times, but always during the day, always for practical purposes. A gathering was different. It implied acceptance, belonging, permanence. "I don't want to intrude," she said. Daniel's expression was patient. "You wouldn't be intruding. You'd be joining. There's a difference." Tommy, who had overheard the conversation, came running into the room. "Please, Mom. Please, please, please." Rachel looked at her son's hopeful face, then at Daniel's steady gaze. "Okay," she said. "We'll be there." The day of the gathering was warm and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that made everything seem possible. Rachel and Tommy arrived at the chapter house to find the yard transformed. Tables had been set up on the grass, covered with food and drinks. Children ran between the adults, their laughter filling the air. The motorcycles were lined up in their usual neat row, gleaming in the sunlight. Grace greeted them at the entrance, pulling Rachel into a hug. "You came. I'm so glad." "I almost didn't," Rachel admitted. "It still feels strange being part of something like this." Grace stepped back and looked at her with knowing eyes. "Belonging always feels strange at first, but you'll get used to it. You're one of us now." The day unfolded in a blur of food, conversation, and connection. Rachel found herself talking to people she had never met, sharing stories, laughing at jokes, feeling the warmth of community wrap around her like a blanket. Tommy was in heaven, surrounded by adults who treated him as one of their own, teaching him things, including him in activities, making him feel valued. As the sun began to set, Daniel called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered in a loose circle, and a hush fell over the group. "Every year at this gathering, we take a moment to remember why we're here," Daniel said. "We're not just a club, we're a family, and family means taking care of each other no matter what." He looked at Rachel, and she felt her cheeks flush. "This year, I want to introduce someone special. Most of you have already met her, but for those who haven't, this is Rachel Donovan. Her father, Staff Sergeant William Carter, served with me in Iraq. He saved my life, and he asked me to watch over his daughter if anything ever happened to him." Daniel paused, his voice thick with emotion. "It took me 20 years to find her. 20 years of searching, of dead ends, of wondering if I would ever be able to keep my promise. But I found her. And more than that, I found a woman who embodies everything her father stood for. Courage, resilience, love." He reached into his vest and pulled out a small patch, embroidered with the wolf's head symbol of the club. "Rachel, you're not a member of the Iron Wolves. You're not required to ride or wear our colors or follow our rules. But you are family, and we want you to know that wherever you go, whatever happens, you will never be alone again. This patch is a symbol of that promise. Keep it close and know that an entire brotherhood stands behind you." He pressed the patch into her hand, and the crowd erupted in applause. Rachel looked down at the symbol in her palm, then up at the faces surrounding her. Daniel, Grace, Marcus, Reese, Sandra, and dozens of others whose names she was still learning. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to truly belong. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you all." The night continued with music and dancing and stories told around a bonfire. Tommy fell asleep in Rachel's lap, exhausted from the day's excitement, and she held him close, watching the flames dance against the darkness. Daniel sat down beside her, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. Rachel smiled. I know. I can feel it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn as the stars emerged one by one overhead. The past had been honored. The present was filled with love, and the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. Rachel thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain of loss, the struggle of survival, the unexpected gift of a stranger on her doorstep, carrying a promise from another life. She had been so certain that she was alone, that she had to face everything by herself. But her father had known better. He had planted seeds of love that had taken 20 years to bloom, and now she was surrounded by the harvest. Mom? Tommy stirred in her lap, his voice sleepy. Yes, sweetheart. I'm really happy. Rachel kissed the top of his head. Me too, baby. Me too. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life, then faded into the night. And Rachel Donovan, daughter of a hero, mother of a joyful son, sat surrounded by her new family, finally at peace. She understood now what her father had tried to tell her. Kindness is not something you earn. It is something you pass on. And somewhere, somehow, she would find her own way to continue the chain, to honor his memory, to make him proud. The promise had been kept, but the story was just beginning. If you watched this far, it means this story touched your heart. Leave a comment saying, I watched this far, so I can get to know you and know who really appreciates the stories on this channel. Your presence here matters more than you know. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness transcends time and that love always finds a way, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of human connection. Because in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, we need reminders that there are still people who keep their promises, people who show up, people who refuse to let distance or time or circumstance break the chains of love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And remember, the smallest act of kindness can echo across decades, touching lives in ways we can never predict. Until next time, take care of each other.